But basically, what we're learning about in the biurim is based on the halacha that there's a halacha brought down in the poskim that you can't coerce a young lady, a single lady, to go out into the marketplace if she's your employee. And it seems like that halacha does not apply anymore. Why? Because there's definitely been a change in the standards of women going out into the marketplace. He writes, "Aval genaihi leish." This is the Rambam. Genaihi leisha shetiya yotza tamid pam bechutz pam berachavos. It's considered to be degrading for a woman to be going about all the time, sometimes in the streets and sometimes outdoors. A man should try to stop his wife from going out all the time. If I tried that, my wife would be climbing the walls. A man should only let his wife out of the house once a month. Come on. Pamayim b'chodesh lefi hatzorech, or maybe two times a month if the need is great. Okay, she'ein yofi leisha elaleshev b'zavis besa, because it's always best for women to be at home, right? This is definitely anachronistic. Shekain kasuv kol kavuda bas melech benima, because all of the glory, as the pasuk says, that all of the glory of the princess is indoors. Ulafizeh, and according to this, nira de pas de pisco shel harimi bronanal nishtana bismanenu, based on basically, it seems like this whole psak halacha has changed in our times. Benira de toli hakol lefi rahos ha'inyan lefi hamakom behazman, and it all depends on the time and the place. Okay, so once a month. I'm going to tell this to my wife. I'll see her reaction. It's black and white. It's black and white in the Rambam. I mean, how can you argue with the Rambam? Okay. All right. Well, yes, I mean, but he's quoting from the Gemara. Now, I do want to point out that in Chumash, you don't have that phenomenon. In the Chumash itself, Rachel, Leah, they all went to the well. They were going to draw water. Rivka, the women typically did do chores that brought them into the public square. Yisro's daughters, right? So different times, different places. It's definitely you go according to the time and place in which you live. So when we say ancient times, it doesn't mean the biblical period. The biblical period, people were more normal. And at some point along the way, people became barbaric. And as a result of people being barbaric, they had to hide their wives because men were behaving more in a debased fashion. And then eventually people calmed down. And I guess. Okay. Okay. Now, you go according to the minhag. Another point that's raised in the biurim. Okay. Okay. Al derech haminhag b'shulchan aruch siman shin lamed hey sif aleph hasocher es hapol limalacha yadua. If you hire a worker to perform a specific task for you, I need you to clear out my warehouse, or I need you to plow this field. V'nishlama b'chatzi hayom, and he finishes the work early. He does it in half the time. Now the question is, if I'm paying him by the day, and he finishes his work, so how do I make up that time, or what do I have him do during that remainder of the time? I'm allowed to give him additional work that can't be more difficult than the work that I was giving him previously. The im ein lo nosing lo scharo kipol batel. And if not, then I don't have to compensate him. Um, um, I suppose what it means is I can pay him. Let's say it's a job that takes 3 days, and he finished it in 2.5 days. I can pay him for the second half of the day, or of that last day. I don't have to give him the full wages. I can pay him as a poel bottle, as if I'm paying someone for not working, and I don't have to pay him the full wage. Uvahaga v'yesh omrim dimrotza lahosif bischaro tzarech lasos afilu malacha keveda min harishona ad kam l'shana. And the Ramah writes that if you are willing to add to his wages, not sure if I understand what this means. Yesh lo malacha kamosa o kala mimena ose, im ein lo nosen lo scharo kepoel batel. And then the Ramah, I don't really understand the scenario over here. The Ramah writes that v'yesh omrim de'im rotza lahosif bischaro tzarech lasos afilu malacha keveda min harishana. That if the employer is willing to add to the payment of that last day, then he can compel the employee to do an even more difficult task. In other words, even more laborious. That's really what the Ramah is saying. That doesn't seem to be fair. Neither case seems to be fair. It doesn't really make sense according to our current standards. If I hired a guy for 3 days, I have to pay him for 3 days' work, even if he finishes, even in 1 day. It depends. I suppose it depends on how I contract with him. Right. So right, you're right. But here it seems like we're talking about the halach of hiring a day laborer. I pay him by the day. V'hasma heir al zed adifa minei kasav moram simin shin lamed gimel de balabayis yachol lachzor kepoel af acher shehischil lasos. He says there's even a bigger chiddush that an employer can even fire an employee after he's already started the work. Provided that the workers can find work elsewhere easily for the rest of the day. Even if the work that they would have to find is more difficult. And they can get more money for the more difficult work. He says, but it would seem to me that in this kind of scenario, where I'm not obligated to pay them the full wage for the last part of the day when they're not productive anymore, is that the employee doesn't have a right to have a complaint. He says, I'm skipping a few lines. He says, "V'hinei behemshach kasav sham hamachaber v'zeloshono." The dafka shelo heralo osa malacha techila, aval im hera osalo the ra'a shelo hayaba malaches yom, below hisna eno nosin lo klum la'achar shosholma ad kan loshona. The Machaber goes even further and says that if you showed the employee the work, and the employee sees that it won't take a full day to finish that job, then the employer doesn't have to pay him for a full day, but only has to pay him for the amount of time that he worked, and can pay him only for half a day. But then the Sma writes, this is the main point. The Sma writes, that's only provided that you tell him, I need to hire you to clear out this room, to do this work. You didn't hire him for the day. So he's not a day laborer. You didn't hire him for the day. You just hired him to do a specific task. Avalim sachro al yom echad, afal gav deherlo osamalacha, yachal apolomar, midasacharta li al yom echad, amarti vada yesh lecha od malacha b'makom acher ad kan devarav. So the laborer can say, no, I demand payment for a full day's work because you contracted with me for the day, And even though you showed me what needs to be done, I assumed even though it's not going to take me the full day, you'd have other work for me to do. V'hataz hisig al zeh the dvar megugamin ve'en lahem perush de'ech yifaresh mashakasav beresh asocher sapol malacha yadua the lo zocher hayom ech shaykh lomer achar kach v'nishlama b'chatzi hayom darei habi kablan an kan devarav. And the Taz questions this. He says, because if you told a guy that you need him for a specific job, then that's not a schir yom, that's not a day laborer, that's what's called a kablan, which is paying him by the job. So there's a contradiction in terminology in this whole halacha. Avalanias daiti nira debir devar shel hasmahu kidlah halan. So it seems to me that the way to explain this is as follows. The bereisha mayri sheshol habalabayis is apol al scharo. The situation is as follows. An employer hires an employee and he asks him, how much do you charge for your labor? The employee tells him, I take $100 a day. That's what I take for a day's labor. And then the balabais doesn't say explicitly, I'm going to hire you for the day. Ella hiskim lakachtu la'avodasa. He says, okay, come and work for me. I need you. Ve'alzeh kamrinan di'im lo herehu matzarech lasos, as tzarech lahashlam velosus lo shar chatzi hayom kepol batol, istamas chiras polhu al yom. He says, then in the event that he finishes the work in midday, because it's not a full job, you have to pay him for the entirety of the day, even though he's entitled to be paid less. The employer can pay him less than what he would pay for that particular kind of work, based on what the guy would pay to have a half day off. But if the employee sees the work that needs to be done, he knows it only takes a half a day, then the employer has a right to say to him, you say you take $100 a day, this was a half day job, so I'm only paying you $50. And since the employee saw the job and he knew that it was only going to take a half a day, and that the employer says, I knew it was only going to take a half a day, and the employee didn't say anything when he saw the job that needs to be done, the employer has a right to say to him, I'm paying you for a half day's work because you have the rest of the day off. But that's only if there was never an agreement that I'm hiring you for the full day. But if the employer says, I'm hiring you for one day, so then, as gam im heralo kodem samalacha, yachal apol omer deamarti belibi devada yeshlo od malacha kayotze bezepa makom acher bedivrei hasmam mevarim beli gimel. Then the employee can say, even though you showed me the work, and I knew that it was only a half a day worth of work, but I assumed that you would give me other chores to do to make up the day, because you told me you were hiring me for the day. So really, ultimately, these are the types of misunderstandings that can take place all the time on the workplace if there's no proper stipulation made when you hire someone. So that's why, I mean, one of the things that you see from all of this is that it is important to make stipulations at the outset of the employment period to let someone know what you're hiring them for, the work period, the terms of the work, whether you're feeding them, whether you're not feeding them, whether they're entitled to a break, whether they're not entitled to a break. All of this should be stipulated unless you wish to rely on the standards that have already been established by the Dina de Malchusa or the conventions of the commune. Okay. Now, just one quick likutim. Kablan sha'asa shtar in balabayas. A kablan, which is a guy who's hired, this is in likutim. A kablan is someone who is hired to do a specific job, like clean out my warehouse or make me a chair or whatever it is. Afshalo asu kinyan shuvein hakablan yachol lachzor bo. Even though they didn't make a kinyan, But they just said, yes, I'm gonna, the Kabbalah says, I'm gonna make you the chair, right? Once he agreed to do it verbally, he doesn't have a right to back out on the deal. Uvein shtar be'edim, uvein shtar ksav yad habale davar, b'chasima, so ein shum chiluk. He says, as long as they've written up a shtar, there's someone who, it doesn't need to be signed by witnesses. It could just be signed by two people. It doesn't make a difference. Rak le'inyan parati le'inyan litrof mimishabedi abochola yeser hadvarim alima milsa d'shtori b'chasimas yado kemoshtar be'edim. He says that when you sign a piece of paper, that has the same power as a paper that's signed by witnesses. The only time you need witnesses to sign onto the document is only if there's going to be a conflict afterwards, where let's say one party says, I paid you already. I hired you and I paid you. What about the contract? Yes, it's true. I signed the contract, but I also paid you. Bring witnesses that I didn't pay you. Right? That's where witnesses are going to be relevant. But in a situation where a person signs a shtar that he commits himself to pay for a certain amount of work, that's enforceable in a beis din, just like it's enforceable in a court of law. Okay. Okay, let us go on to the next halacha. We'll go on to Sif Yud Aleph. Kishem, here, it's on the top. Kishem shemitz v'lasei schar pu'ulas adam bizmano. He says there is a mitzvah to pay an employee on time, at the time when the wages are due. V'im icharo over below sasa. And if you delay paying someone their wages, you are in violation of a mitzvah lo saseh. And what is the mitzvah lo saseh? Shenemar, as it says, biyomo titein sicharo v'lo savo alav hashemesh. The Torah says, on the day that he works for you is the day that you must pay him, and you may not allow an evening to elapse. Do not allow the evening to elapse. Kach mitzvah lasei schar behema o kelim bizmano. In a similar fashion, it is also a commandment, it is also a mitzvah that when you rent chattel, let's say you rent an animal or you rent an appliance, you must pay for payment is due immediately for that object, v'im icharo over belav. And if you delay payment for the use of an object, you also are in violation of the mitzvah lo saseh. Shenemar lo sa'ashok sachir ani ve'evyon. Do not oppress a laborer who is poor and downtrodden. Me'achecha omigerecha asher ba'artzecha bisharecha. From your brethren or from the stranger who lives in your land, biyomo titein scharo. You must give him his wages on that day. Ma tamu lomar ba'artzecha. Why does the pasuk say that if he is a stranger in your land? Bahalo kol davar shehu chovas haguf nohig bein ba'aretz bein b'chutz la'aretz. Don't we know that any mitzvah that is incumbent upon the individual applies equally both in Eretz Yisrael and in Chutz La'aretz? So why does the Torah say that this specifically applies in the land? Ela l'rabos kol davar sheba'artzecha. The reason is not to limit this halacha to Eretz Yisrael, but to tell you that anything that applies to land is included in this halacha. And so therefore, kol davar sheba'artzecha, anything that you might do having to do with paying someone for services or objects, payment must be made immediately after the product is delivered. So as soon as you've finished the employment period, payment is due. As soon as you finish the rental period, payment is due. As soon as you've received the goods, payment is due. Okay, that's what the word aretz is doing. It's saying that's right.
So you got to pay on visa.
Now,
31 days pay for allowing only a waste us.
it's true. Obviously, it depends on the terms, right? It depends on the terms. If you do extend credit to customers and you say payment is due within 30 or 60 or 90, right? You can make a deal like that with your customers. But if you want to, if there is no convention and there is, then like you just hire a kid to rake the lawn for you, then you can't say, come back tomorrow and I'll pay you. That's a Torah law. You have to pay him as soon as he's finished the job. Payment is due immediately. Avol al schiras karka, yesh misha omer she'eno over. But when it comes to schiras karka, rental of real estate, there is an opinion that you're not in violation by delaying payment, like paying the rent late. He says, "Shenemar be'artzecha velo artzecha," as the pasuk says, in your land, but not your land itself. Now, why that is, and well, it's basically reading the pasuk as be'artzecha, that activity that is on your land, but not the land itself. When it comes to land itself, you are not in violation of this mitzvahs lo saseh if you pay the rent late on karka, on land leasing. But with all other objects, with all other kinds of commercial exchanges, contracts, payment is due immediately upon conclusion of the term or upon the delivery of the goods. Okay, so we'll have to go through the meforshim over here. Obviously, tomorrow. This is where we'll hold it for today. Okay. Have a good day.
Go ahead, Rabbi.